companies stumbling because they've gathered data just any old way and then decide to put it to a secondary use, right? Let's try this with AI when it wasn't gathered with a purpose to begin with. And sometimes they need to start over from the beginning and regather data, right? In a clean way and oriented towards that solution.
Adam, did you want to touch on that?
Sure, yeah. I mean, to revisit an earlier point quickly, I think one of the most fundamental things in AI that no one talks about is that neural networks have been around a really, really long time. They were previously called perceptron, and it was a single neuron.
1956.
Exactly. And infrastructure and compute are really what enabled everything that's possible today. But I think more broadly, it's helpful to differentiate between two things within artificial intelligence. There's prediction and there's judgment. And I think that prediction is what most people think of when they think of artificial intelligence. They think about you look at some data set, you make some prediction based on what you've seen in the past, a supervised learning case. But to go off of what Scott was saying earlier, vertical knowledge is extremely important for the judgment piece. And there's basically compute inflection point we've hit that's driving down the value of prediction because it's becoming much cheaper and much easier to do and much more democratized and accessible to everyone. So that drives up the value of judgment and domain expertise.
And do you think that plays into sort of this relationship between humans and machines in whether it be training or actually the end user in terms of human-computer interaction?
Absolutely. I think it's a very good framework to use the whole notion of judgment and prediction. If you look at that and then you find that what is the biggest problem in coming to the right judgment or the right prediction is it ends up becoming how you figure out what data to use and how do you transform that data into a variable that makes you get to the right judgment or makes you get to the right prediction. That is the hard part. Applying AI, there are multiple techniques that you can apply. You can apply multiple algorithms or combinations of algorithms. But the judgment, the understanding of which data element do you select, what is contextual, what is complete, what is consumable, and what is semantically clean. That's the hard part. And yeah, selfishly, I will say that's what Paxata is doing.
Adam, are you excited about hardware? What do you think about LiDAR and enabling technologies like better cameras for computer vision? Is that something Lightspeed's interested in these days?
I mean, I'm very excited about hardware. I would say, to zoom out a little bit, I think that history is very revisionist in the Valley and people artificially weave categories around startups. So I think that hardware is a very interesting form factor, but I don't think about hardware startups as intrinsically being about hardware, just like I don't think about AI companies being intrinsically about AI. So there are certainly very many interesting applications that can be solved by hardware. I am much more interested in those applications than the hardware itself.
And Scott, when you look at the broader ecosystem of specialty investors, your Comet Labs, or perhaps even a DCVC, what is the long-term role for those companies that are doubling down so heavily on data and AI companies?
Well, I'm very bullish based on the whole data and AI space, so I think they're very well positioned. And I think there's absolutely room in our ecosystem for specialists. Once you understand an ecosystem, you start to know the players. And as I mentioned earlier, there aren't that many institutions that are churning out really high-end folks. And so it makes it easier for DCVC to stay on top of that talent flow. And I also think success begets success. So I'm bullish on them. But I mean, I gotta be honest, I still like our diversified model. But I think they're gonna do real well.
And Chris, you all are building something of an enabling technology. Maybe for folks in the room, you can explain a bit about sort of Skymind and what's going on there. But I think it'd be interesting to talk about that with respect to other APIs, libraries, ML as a service. Obviously that's an incredibly broad category, but I'm sure that you have a couple of thoughts on that and what the future of those companies are.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, John. So our goal is to build a tool that productizes well, right? So the question that companies should ask themselves when they're data scientists or choosing a deep learning technology is, Can this run at scale? Does it integrate with the stack I spent hundreds of millions of dollars building? Or does it give me a blob of Python and C code with security flaws, right? So a lot of the time, data scientists are not always making the best choices. They're choosing for ease of use instead of scalability. Deep learning for J is meant to solve for both. Sorry, what was the rest of your question?
So yeah, I'm asking really long questions here. So when you look at sort of like ML as a service and other APIs, I think there's a lot of folks out there. There's the big players, you see what IBM's doing, and then there's plenty of startups that pitch, myself, and I'm sure plenty of the investors that are up here. And,
Yeah.
and are you bullish or
No,
not?
I'm not. I don't believe in that. The history of machine learning startups is littered with people who thought machine learning as a service was a good idea. It's not. It's just not. One of the reasons is data gravity, right? The people with the money, enterprise, they don't want to send their data to somebody else's model in the cloud, especially if it's just a startup running its own server somewhere. They don't want to do it. There's all kinds of security concerns, and it costs time and money and effort to send very large data sets somewhere, right? The very definition of big data, which is the only data that's worthwhile in AI, is that it's costly to move, right? So in general, I would say it's much better to send algorithms to data than it is to bring the data to the algorithms, and that's the problem with machine learning as a service. If you look at the cloud vendors, and I don't think the cloud's going to win AI precisely because they charge a bit too much per chip per hour, right? But if you look at the cloud vendors, the ones that will have the greatest advantage are the ones where a lot of data is being generated and stored now, and that's AWS, right? It's going to be easier for the people working there to get their data into the algorithms, right? And that's unavoidable. If you look, each cloud vendor has its own advantages and disadvantages. AWS tends to win infrastructure. Microsoft really knows enterprise. They know how to hold people's hand. That's important with our kind of client. Google's built the most popular tool, right? But they're kind of a come-to-me product-centered company that doesn't know how to win hearts and minds in enterprise.
What do you think about developer communities? Because you're really close to them as well, and you see what Google has done and what other folks are doing to try to get in as early as possible to get those folks on GCP or AWS. What does that look like a year from now when folks are already deeply embedded on those platforms and it becomes really hard to transition from one to the next?
Yeah, lock-in gets old really quickly. Yeah, people don't like that. That's one of Palantir's problems now, right? And that'll be a problem for the cloud vendors if they try to really lock people in by forcing them to use tools that are only optimized on a specific cloud. And I just have to say, devs don't have money, right? And data scientists are not a very large market. So if that's the way that they will dominate AI, I think they're going to run into real constraints.
Scott,
If I can interject real quick, I think, what you're saying is absolutely correct about avoiding vendor lock-in. So just like there was a lot of value created in moving data from on-premise to the cloud or to a hybrid cloud environment, I think there will be a lot of value in an orchestration layer that lives between the different cloud vendors, especially as you move to all the function as a service or serverless paradigms, when everything's reduced down to basically a blob of code that runs for a couple hundred milliseconds. People will be very indifferent as to what infrastructure everything's running on.
And
I think speaking to this notion of developer communities, I think it's extremely important. One thing that has become absolutely evident is that developers are adopting open source technologies and they are only focused on open source technologies. They are very, very selective about some closed proprietary technology. When you look at a developer, they're focusing on open source. Well, the good news is open source is widely available. The bad news from an investor perspective or a vendor perspective is how do you make money out of that? So one tip is leverage open source technologies, create an applied or an application, whatever that is, software, hardware, whatever, and then deliver value, and that's where you make money.
is there anything that you see right now that's getting a lot of attention that you think open source is going to eat, that people don't, it's not already popular opinion that it will?
I think you just have to look at the stack, and if you see what has happened, OSs have been, operating systems have been completely open sourced, databases have been completely open sourced now, and if you just keep going up the stack, I think when you start seeing things like visualizations companies' valuations dropping crazy, so I'm talking about BI tools, right? you start looking at the various enterprise stack. I mean, I'm an enterprise guy, so that's what I look at. I think what is going to become really good, and over again, is the enterprise software business is becoming an efficient market. So if you're really delivering value, you're addressing a business audience. You know, I'm sorry, I love data scientists and I have a lot of respect for them, but they're only, 1/100th of the population of the business community. So focus on this. And I look at the trends and I say, just keep looking at the stack and you'll see how you're going in. And one tip, if Amazon is getting into any business, you're in trouble.
I'd love to add to Prakash's comments, which were very astute. Open source is eating enterprise software. A lot of very large organizations are orienting their procurement around things like Hadoop and Spark and Kafka. A question that we got in the early days is, well, how are you going to make money, right? And the answer is every open source company chooses where it draws the line. It chooses a closed source layer. Red Hat had closed source as its security layer. Cloudera, which just filed for its IPO, closed source is its management and monitoring layer, its government and data auditing layer. And that line gets drawn right where the enterprise needs something, right? To appease regulators, right? To run at scale, right? That's where those lines get drawn, and where kind of an open source company flips over into being an open core company, right? To serve its enterprise clients.
Scott, when you look at the overall ecosystem right now, maybe folks would find it interesting. I mean, is there one or two companies that you just think are worth highlighting that are absolutely killing it in the machine intelligence space that perhaps aren't getting a lot of attention?
Yeah, well, and I tell you, a company I work with a lot is Data Robot, and it's just a fascinating example of the leverage that some of these new AI technologies can provide. And what